Hello and welcome back to Lorehammer. I'm your host, Mark, and joining me today we got Christian and Jordan. We're going to be talking about Sanguinius. Christian, you specifically requested multiple times to be on this episode.
I don't know why. Sanguinius isn't even my favorite primarch.
Well, you have to pay homage to the
I felt
greats.
compelled, yeah.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
a pilgrimage, I owe him something.
Yeah, and we're finally recording this episode, and it got canceled. And Jordan, we canceled you one time, I canceled on you one time. That rarely happens, but we made it.
Cancel culture.
Damn cancel culture.
Yeah.
All valid reasons, but Sanguinius' sacrifice has been long waited. People have been like, hey, did Lorehammer end at 200 episodes? People have been sending me messages worried I fled to a different country. No, everything's okay. I'm still in Panama. We're still doing Lorehammer. It's all good.
It's me. I've moved to Bosnia now.
Great place. I love the street meat there. You can definitely tell it's rat.
Shout out to our Bosnian listeners.
Yeah. Today, we're doing Sanguinius, but before we get into it, let's just do some housekeeping. Join the Discord. It's a lot of fun. People chat in there. People chat in the different voice channels and stuff. That's always fun to see people just chatting and talking in there. You can join the Discord by just going to the episode description. There'll be links there. It's pretty simple. Easy peasy. See you there.
Yeah, it's also easy to just join the Patreon too and join the Imperial Tithe and support the show. You get ad-free version of the show for only $2.50 a month. That is an incredible deal. Or you can get the video version for $5 if you feel like you need to see us make terrible jokes.
And if you are, sorry, go ahead, Mark.
The chat says, I thought you were trying to retire or retrieve Eric's soul from the warp, to be honest. No, just like Sanguinius, Eric has been eaten and consumed and will remain dead and gone, apparently. So just like Sanguinius should, but maybe if Sanguinius comes back, we'll resurrect Eric, but not until then. I think.
Not until then.
Yeah, I like to be lorically correct and canonically friendly in all things, including my personal life. So,
all right. And if you are a patron, you can also jump in on the live stream. And for the Friday episodes, you can join me for some whiskey and Warhammer, as per usual. And we also have a live chat going during the show. And we do call-in guests at the end of the episode. So if you're a patron member, you can do all that fun stuff with us. Be a part of the show. It's fun times.
I don't have any whiskey on me, but I do have some nice coco leche, some nice chocolate milk for tonight's episode.
Great combo, whiskey and chocolate milk. Yes.
Oh yeah. And then we're both wearing the muscle shirts. It's gonna be
perfect symmetry.
Yeah.
In the chat, they're asking which whiskey I'm drinking tonight. I'm doing a Canadian that is actually quite nice. It's a Canadian whiskey called Goodrich and Williams, and it's got some nice fruity tones to it, but it's more of a caramel taste. But yeah, it's very nice.
The fruity tones are coming from your voice, Jordan.
Excuse you.
It's just in your mouth.
I thought we were doing Sanguinius, not Fulgrim tonight.
Two sides of the same coin.
Yes. They kind of are. Maybe we'll bring that up later. Yeah, Sanguinius. A Primarch. We're back at it doing another Primarch. Tonight's episode is his origins and the Great Crusade. So we're going to be doing his quick little review, the Primarch project, but then diving into his youth and what happened on Baal. It's kind of a pretty interesting place because it's, a planet and moons. And so there's a couple different locations that are very different. They'll be fun to talk about. We'll talk about the coming of the Emperor in this episode, the Great Crusade, a little mention of the Blood Angels, not too much in this one, but we'll get to them. Don't you worry. And then notable campaigns that happened. These ones are interesting. I tried to find notable ones with Sanguinius specifically, and it was tough. This whole episode was short, to be honest with you. It was tough to write about him. I found the notes were short. We'll get to my thoughts on that in a minute as well. But yeah, we'll talk about his personality, at the end of the Great Crusade, his powers, his flight and foresight, and his appearance and his war gear. So it's going to be a pretty interesting little episode. Yeah, like I was kind of saying, it was hard writing about him. I feel like he was kind of this character that you're told to love, and you do love him. He is cool, but also like there's not a lot of cool examples I found of him being like gangster or just like, why do we love him? Why do we actually love him besides him looking like an angel and would like him?
Yeah. I'm not surprised that there's not a lot of notes on him. He seems like one of those characters where he's maybe lacking a little more substance, like you're saying. Like,
Yeah.
you're told to like him, but why? It's almost a little bit of Horus in there, but at least Horus has like a lot of backstory to go through. Not all of it good, but you're told that Horus is this like charismatic leader. It's like, okay, show me, don't just tell me.
Exactly. Now, the one thing I really did like about this episode, so keep your eyes peeled for this, is, we talk about the mythos of Primarchs and how they used to be mythical. We didn't know a lot, but it is super steeped with Sanguinius, with mythical things that happen. Like at one point he cries, and then where his teardrops hit the ground, a blossom of flower grows, like, did that actually happen? That's pretty mythical. I love that thought though. Like that's like so cool, but hard to say if that actually happened.
Yeah,
I
it
mean,
sounds a lot more poetic.
Yeah.
I mean, Sanguinius really does have like angelic vibes to him, so it doesn't surprise me that there's sort of a lot of mythos surrounding him. Angel, like he's sort of the Emperor's most noble and heroic defender, obviously, as we'll probably talk about later in this episode.
Does Michael the Archangel ever meet
Yes.
meet his end?
No.
No.
But he 1v1 Satan, which is kind of
Yeah.
that imagery of.
Yeah.
We'll get into it with Sanguinius fighting demons, but
Yeah,
and
cool.
like the Prince of Persia and stuff. Like Michael the Archangel is known for fighting other entities.
yeah,
in
he's
the
a patron
war.
saint of like warriors and stuff too. So
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, now this is what I found was very cool in writing Sanguinius. It's like, yeah, so I don't really know why I like him, except that he has all these cool mythical moments that almost just seem unbelievable to some degree, but that's what's also cool.
that's the power of faith, Mark. You're learning.
I will
learning.
I will say something about Christian, what you were saying. I was reading up a little bit on him. Yeah, there may be less dense lore about him. However, he was like one of the first Primarchs who really had established canon lore about him, going as far back as the 80s. So he is sort of like one of the OGs compared to other later Primarchs where more stuff was written a lot later.
Yeah. That is true, and it does. Him, Horus, and the Emperor do have a significant kind of plot point that's always been a pinnacle moment. And he's had a couple of moments that are old, very old, like his 1v1 with, is it Kabanda, the demon? Yeah, like there are. I'm not saying there aren't these great moments, and especially actually, maybe we'll get into it a little later. He does this good speech that they did an audiobook version of, which was really fantastically done. So I'm not saying, like, I'm not criticizing that. Oh, there's nothing there.
No.
It's just not as much.
Well, and here's what I found too was like in the Great Crusade, there wasn't many good moments, but then the Horus Heresy kicks off, and then he really fires in overdrive. We see him in the Imperium Secundus. We see him, at the Eternity Gate. We see him doing all these cool things once the Horus Heresy breaks out. But Great Crusade is like
200 years that you need to build up here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well,
and
I was just making the point that density of lore doesn't necessarily equal like how old his lore is, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah. No, that's true. That's true too. And it doesn't make it bad or good. I prefer to be a little lighter on details, or you end up with a horror situation where you have a character who's like all muddled because it's too much that we don't want to know. But without further ado, let's delve into Sanguinius, his origins, and the Great Crusade. Sanguinius, revered in his lifetime as the Great Angel and the Brightest One, was the Primarch of the Blood Angels Legion of Space Marines and the genetic forefather of the Adeptus Astartes chapters that formed the Sanguinary Brotherhood in the 41st millennium. Among the Primarchs, he was often held as the most noble and admired, not only by mortals, but by his fellow brothers, Horus included. Possessed of a radiant presence and a deep well of empathy, Sanguinius inspired unwavering loyalty and affection. Yet behind his golden wings and the unshakable grace that lay a heavy burden, visions of grim futures that he bore in silence. His fate would come to intertwine with the greatest upheaval in Imperial history, standing at the heart of the betrayal that would shape the destiny of mankind forever.
Yeah, this radiant presence that he kind of emits. It's even hitting us. We just naturally like him. He's not even real. That's how you do it.
I feel his presence in the room with me right now. Yeah, so the Primarch Project, the Space Marine Legions were among the greatest creations of the Emperor of Mankind. To achieve his vision of a united humanity, he forged transhuman warriors of immense power and devotion. Among these, the Ninth Legion, the Blood Angels, stood apart, not only for their valor, but for the radiant presence of their Primarch, Sanguinius. From their earliest days, they followed him with the unwavering loyalty, inspired by the purity of his spirit and the quiet sorrow in his eyes. Like all first founding legions, the Blood Angels arose from the ashes of the Age of Strife. The Emperor, having unified Terra through fire and diplomacy, looked to the stars, his ambition vast and hopeful. But hope alone would not suffice. He needed champions, forged for ceaseless war, immune to doubt and loyal beyond question. In this crucible, the Space Marines were born. To lead them, the Emperor turned to the gene forging arts, crafting 20 Primarchs, each a living symbol of some facet of war. Sanguinius, noble-hearted and burdened with visions of what was yet to come, was among them, destined to bear more than mere command. Yet, even the Emperor's will was not immune to sabotage. Before their purpose could be realized, the Primarchs vanished, scattered by the forces of chaos through the warp, lost to the stars.
Yeah, the classic story of the scattering of all the Primarchs. The scattering affects every Primarch differently, it seems like. Some are kind of unaffected, and some come out with angel wings. Like, basically what happens is they get sucked into the warp and then flung across the galaxy all over. And in the warp, they didn't have no Geller fields, I'm assuming, and demons are scratching at the surface of their pods trying to get in. Maybe some warp energy leaked into Magnus the Red. Or he just has been huffing red spray paint. I don't know.
I have always wondered, though, sort of a question, like, it's a nature versus nurture question, because each Primarch had his own specific genetic modifications, which the Emperor designed. Yet each one was set in a unique setting that would have affected his genetics differently. So you wonder, like, how much of what they became was a result of their genetics, and that obviously plays a big part in not just the 40K universe, but specifically in the Primarchs, and how much was their context that they live in that, like, shaped who they were. Anyway, it's a question. I don't know. I think it's sort of only something you can answer in your own head, but it's just a question to ponder.
I think, like, we have examples of both, kind of, where you have the genetic kind of intention where the Emperor intentionally genetically modified one beforehand. So we have Layman Russ and the Canis Helix. Like, that was the Emperor's doing. That wasn't like traveling through the warp. Where I think we have other examples, like, yeah, Magnus the Red. There's no need for him to be red. It's not like he landed on a planet of red people. And then, yes, there would be some where it's like like Cruz. We'll get to him eventually, but I feel like with him, he lands on the planet. And his tube, I think, was broken too. So he's a little more crazy. And then he lands on the crazy planet. So then the warp crazy gets even more crazy enhanced. Yeah, so you kind of get like with every one, some of them are like, I think you have to look at each one and like, did the Emperor design this one? Maybe the angel wings were intentional. Maybe that is kind of the vibe of them, you know? Or what do you think, Chris?
Yeah, I don't know one way or the other for certain. My thought, though, kind of influenced by some of the discussion around that. I think there's a conversation around whether, even Sanguinius wonders if he was designed or if this was a mutation. But the warp often expresses things that are part of you. So
yeah, okay.
Yeah, so it could be a situation where like, his angelic soul or nobleness caused those wings to develop while being flung through the warp.
Yeah,
So
and like
might not be
maybe
that.
when he flows through the warp, it all time is the same again. So he realizes, oh, he's going to be an angel and die, and like, yeah, all that
Right,
kind of
exactly.
peeped in. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay.
So yeah, exactly. So it could be not that it wasn't intentional, but it is an extension of some part of their being, right? And that's why
yeah,
Conrad Cruz is a little bit more crazy. Like it's an overwrought of his soul, right? Like that was always there, but it makes it magnified and amplified. And then you have the additional feature of like foresight, which a few primarchs seem to have as a warp gift, let's say, or curse.
yeah. Fuzz says, think the wings were for. Sorry, I think the wings were on purpose for Sanguinius to always be an icon / rallying point. Yeah, that is interesting. And then like, what do you think happened that he didn't choose him as more of a prominent position? Like the War Master was really the only position where a Primarch actually officially got elevated beyond anyone else. If you intended for him that, like maybe he just met Horus and was like, well, he's just fucking cooler than Sanguinius. I don't know. What do you think?
Quick change of plans here.
Yeah, quick change of plans.
I do.
Cool wings, but this guy's bald.
It is interesting that you say that, Mark, too, because we know that even Horus thought that Sanguinius ought to be the War Master as well, even when he was chosen. And I believe the Chaos Gods wanted Sanguinius to be their champion. I believe that he was like their first option, and Horus was the second option too. So there's also this like competing for Sanguinius' soul, and like Horus is almost like his dark mirror. He obviously chooses chaos, and
not to go too crazy off on a random tangent, but a dark Sanguinius, like a warp fallen Sanguinius, bat Sanguinius.
Yeah, he exists. His name is Conrad Curse.
Oh shit, he's gay. He's gay.
Hold on, was I reading correctly that in the early depictions of Sanguinius, his wings were more bat-like than angel-like, or did I misread that?
I've never seen that anywhere.
Okay. Yeah, if it's old, it's like Rogue Trader era. I'd never seen a source for it. It's not saying it's impossible, but I don't.
Okay.
I don't recall
just an aside, because I thought I read that somewhere, not recently, but I continue.
Yeah.
Someone fact check that.
So his planet or his pod gets flung, and he lands on a planet. So let's talk about his youth. Soon after the Emperor forged the Primarchs, the ruinous powers of chaos struck, scattering the infant sons through the Imperium. Though they could not destroy the Primarchs, protected as they were by the Emperor's arcane and psychic wards, the Dark Gods sought to twist the Emperor's grand design for their own insidious ends. Even at the dawn of his journey, Sanguinius, among the most luminous of the Emperor's creation, was marked not by corruption, but by the weight of fate. His gestation pod fell to Baal Secundus, a harsh and broken moon at the desolate site now known as Angel's Fall. There was a wandering tribe of humans calling themselves the folk of pure blood, or simply the blood, discovered the infant. Chaos had altered him subtly, for from his back sprang delicate angelic wings. Though the child's form was otherwise flawless, his people debated ending his life then and there, but mercy and an instinctive awe at his presence prevailed. Thus, the boy who would become a savior was spared by the grace of compassion. Yeah, like even these guys, like right off the bat, are like, "Whoa, angel!" That presence, yeah, it's right from the beginning. Sanguinius was angelic not only in body but in spirit. His soul radiant, unstained, and wise beyond its years. In time, the tales and hymns once whispered by the blood would be faithfully transcribed by the librarians of the Blood Angels, enshrined in the sacred archives as revered truths. Though the full details of his earliest years are veiled by time, the stories of his youth echo through the oral traditions of Baal's tribes. Like his brothers, he matured at astonishing rate, and with him grew his wings, feathers white as purity, yet strong as imperial steel. His flight, even as a boy, stirred awe among the people below, who felt in his presence the echo of divinity. He learned quickly, drawing in all that his adoptive parents could offer. Within 3 solid years, he was the size of a Terran toddler, already walking with sure steps. Legend says that even then he slew a fire scorpion barehanded, facing the beast without fear or hesitation. By the time he was 1 year old, he bore the stature and grace of a young man, capable of walking uncovered through Baal's poisoned sands. He surpassed his teachers in combat, could cleave stone with his bare hands and rise into the sky with a poise of a god surveying his world. With Sanguinius as their guide, his tribe knew peace, and under his wisdom, they began to flourish. Yeah, kind of that classic, like, story, you know, people will find him, they kind of, he'll rise to the top of whatever society they kind of get dropped in. We only know a little bit about this society. We know there's tribes on Baal, but it gets a little more interesting, you know, what the enemy is here.
What the dynamics are.
Yeah, the dynamics.
I do think it's interesting, and I don't know if this was conscious on the part of the writers, but just like a lot of the biblical allusions. Obviously, we talked about Michael the Archangel, but also just that he grew up on Baal, which is, you know, another biblical reference. But I don't know if there's anything to that, but just
yeah, I've given that a lot of thought too. I don't know where the connection is for people unfamiliar with ancient Semitic religions. Baal was a Canaanite god. Well, Baal, the word itself just means Lord. So
could have been multiple.
Yeah,
gods.
there could have been multiple gods with the name Lord.
Yeah.
And like you would call even like a human, like your master, like King Baal as well. So I was wondering if that was the angle, if it was something to do with like a royalty angle, or if it was something to do from like a religious angle. There's a lot of child sacrifice associated with Baal. I don't know if like maybe them trying to kill him as an infant was kind of an allusion to that or not. I never really understood that connection personally. But it is an interesting take.
Oh, I think you're muted, Mark.
Tristan says, to be fair, but if my younger brother was 1 year old but looked 20 and had wings and wisdom, I'd probably listen to him too. Nah, that's not the brother dynamic. You still fight him to the death.
Yeah, if you need to. Yeah, to prove a point over a stupid matter.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into more of his youth. When a roving horde of mutant raiders fell upon the tribe, Sanguinius stood alone to meet them. Though they numbered in the hundreds, he struck them down to the last. In that moment, his wrath was revealed, not petty, but righteous, ignited by love and duty. The light of his power surged visibly, a halo playing about his brow as he rose in defense of those he cherished. It was in those fateful years that Sanguinius' greatness became undeniable. He united the scattered, embattled tribes of Baal Secundus, lifting them above their fear and despair. With honor and might, he led the pure-blooded against the mutant tide that sought to strangle humanity's last breath from the moon. Through his hand, the tribes endured, and through his heart, they hoped again. Under his guidance, civilization began to take root once more in the radioactive wastes, and so moved were his people by his wisdom, strength, and boundless empathy that they could only assume he was divine. To them, he was salvation incarnate, the great angel who would carry them to paradise. Yet even as they knelt in devotion, fate turned its gaze upon Sanguinius once more, and the next chapter of his burdened path began. Just an interesting note too, with there's always kind of like a level of irony weaved in with Warhammer lore. I always appreciate is that for all intents and purposes, Sanguinius is a mutant, protecting the pure-blooded against mutant hordes, and mutants are one of the big Imperial no-nos, I guess, like witchcraft, mutants, and heretics are like the three main bads.
Burn the witch, kill the mutant, and what do you do to the Xenos?
Purge them. But yeah, it's always interesting, and then we'll get into it later on of how big of a figurehead that Sanguinius becomes, because he's bigger than just the Blood Angels. Like, to the whole of the Imperium, he'll become a sacred symbol and icon. And again, that irony of like the Imperium hates mutants so much, but one of their biggest icons, in the same way of that reversal, the Emperor is their strongest psyker, and also they revile witches, right? So it's this kind of like shared irony.
Preferred animals, let's murder as many chickens as we possibly can, but we start murdering dogs, now people start raising eyebrows.
No matter how tasty they are.
Some mutations are just better than others, and angel wings is just cooler than being like, I don't know,
a fifth eye on your butt.
Here's my fifth eye on my butt, thanks. Thanks, Warp.
All right, let's get into the home planet. Located in the Baal system of the Segmentum Ultima, Baal itself is a dry, dusty desert world, scarcely inhabited by anyone other than mutants and feral animals. However, its two moons, Baal Prime and Baal Secundus, support notable human settlements and were once paradises for mortal men, though they are now classified as savage feral worlds by the Imperium. Little is known about the past circumference of these two moons, but at the time in the distant past, during the age of technology or the age of strife, a cataclysmic conflict arose and led to widespread use of both viral and nuclear weapons of mass destruction, destroying the ecosystems of both satellites and contaminating their biospheres with intense radioactive fallout, chemical pollution, and deadly biological agents. So is it Tatooine or Dune?
Yeah, it's more like Fallout New Vegas, maybe. It's funny. Humans are like cockroaches, man. It's like, nuclear winter, both viral and nuclear weapons, mass destruction, whatever. We'll survive. We'll just mutate a little bit. This third arm's gonna help me survive this nuclear winter. Just you wait. So we'll jump back. Like we'll talk about a little bit more how it got to that state. We kind of figured out what Sanguinius did with it, but how did it get there before? So the known history. The Blood Angels were shaped not only by the noble heart and deeds of their primarch Sanguinius, but also by the harsh crucible of their chapter's homeworld. Few places in the Imperium have scarred the human soul as deeply as Baal and its twin moons, Baal Prime and Baal Secundus. In ages long past, Baal and its satellites once bore Earth-like atmospheres. Do you guys say Baal or Baal? Which one are you guys going with?
I say Baal, but
Baal.
Yeah, I've always preferred Baal, but I've heard either pronunciation.
Damn it, we Baal!
I'm not a natural Semitic speaker, so I don't know how it's actually pronounced.
Okay. Baal itself was a world of rust-red and deserts, reminiscent of ancient Mars. While its moons blossomed as paradises, where men lived in harmony with nature, creating lives of freedom and grace. The people of Baal became master artisans, carving their legends into towering statues and monuments hewn from mountains. They spread even to the forbidden surface of Baal itself, founding wondrous cities and sang of their civilization's grandeur. What fate befell this golden age remains shrouded in mystery, but during this dark twilight marking the collapse of the dark age of technology, the moons were ravaged by terrible civil wars, likely bitter conflicts among themselves. Devastating weapons of unimaginable power tore through the land. Cities melted into glass ruins, verdant fields turned into poisoned deserts, seas became toxic pits, millions perished, and it seemed that humanity would be snuffed out from the ball system forever. Yet, some souls endured, yes, like the mighty cockroach. Clinging to life on the edges of a radiated wasteland, survivors scavenged the bones of their long-lost world. In the endless night, desperation twists some into cannibals, tearing at the fragile threads of their humanity. In the centuries that followed, the poison seeping through their bodies transformed many into twisted mutants, grotesque shadows of the noble men they once were, a fragile feud held fast to their sanity and humanity, struggling to preserve order amid the chaos. In this shadowed world, the tribe became the last bastion of kinship. For both human and mutant alike, trust was scarce, and kinship vital. The people of Baal became nomads, drifting through wastelands and ruins, locked in ceaseless conflict for dwindling resources. Alliances were fragile and fleeting, and only the strongest survived. What had once been a near paradise had become a hellish wasteland, a crucible of violence and despair. For those few who remained truly human, existence was a daily battle against death. They scavenged in ramshackled vehicles, wrapped in threadbare radiation suits, ever fearful of the cruel clicking of their rad counters, a sound that heralded their doom. It seemed as though the light of humanity would be extinguished, leaving only endless deserts ruled by mutant warlords, which would be fucking cool, and I'd be okay with that, but then, from the cold darkness of the stars, a beacon of hope came, a sign that salvation was near, and that changed the destiny of Baal, and its people would be forever changed. So, Sanguinius arrives. Pretty cool planet, though. Planets.
Yeah. It's fun. Sounds like hell on earth, but yeah, sure.
Yeah. No, I like, the concept of just being able to murder cannibals, and not feel bad about it. You can just go out there. You can come up with some cool, zombie fighting outfit, patches on you. I don't know, whatever you're into. Pirate hat if you want.
There's always some kind of hockey gear involved.
Hockey gear, perfect. Yeah.
Hockey pads, even though you're in the middle of a desert and no one knows what hockey is. Yeah. Why does Arizona have a hockey team? Anyways,
They don't anymore, by the way.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they left.
All their ice rinks melt?
They went to Las Vegas. Or no. Where did they go?
Desert to desert.
They didn't go. They're not in Phoenix anymore. So
yeah,
that's good for them.
Right. They've moved to Ball. They're now on Ball Prime. All right, let's talk about Ball Prime. A human colony was established on Ball Prime, also sometimes called Ball Primus, and known locally as Baaland, the first of the moons of Ball. It is smaller than its sister moon Ball Secundus and home to the colder climate and thinner atmosphere, which makes it the less hospitable of the two moons to human life. Existing alongside Ball Secundus during the dark age of technology, Ball, along with its two moons, were isolated by warp storms. During this period, Baalite civilization survived, and when the storms lifted, a golden age began that saw the worlds flourish. However, at the onset of the Age of Strife, Ball and its moons were isolated once more, and famine ensued. The people of Ball Secundus demanded that they, the inhabitants of a more populous world, be granted the protection of the orbital facilities of Ball Primus, and that the moon be evacuated. Ball Primus refused, and in the ensuing war, the great orbital station somehow crashed into the surface, devastating it. The apocalypse saw the population degenerate into their sickly nomads till the arrival of Sanguinius a millennia later.
Yeah, cool way to end a planet for sure. Expensive, but cool.
Yeah. All right, Ball Secundus, known as Balfora in the local dialect of the people of the blood, was once a paradise world in ancient times. and its surface is still marked by the scattered ruins of that long-lost, technologically advanced human civilization. Its environment, badly scarred by the apocalyptic wars that consumed Baal Secundus during the Age of Strife. The moon's ecosystems are now heavily polluted, marked particularly by zones of intense ionizing radiation and nuclear fallout. Travel in these regions of the moon without access to some form of protection, such as radiation suits, is lethal to human life. But some life forms have adapted to the harsh, radioactive desert environment and now present a source of constant threat to the feral human tribes. Even worse are the cannibalistic mutant tribes, descended from those humans whose genomes were corrupted by exposure to the moon's radiation and
Jordan,
remaining
you're
biological weapons.
so much bigotry coming from you. So they're mutants. Come on. They're not the worst. Let them live.
These mutants long outnumbered the pure strain of people of the blood until Sanguinius made war upon them and dramatically reduced their numbers, practically to extinction. Well, it sounds like Sanguinius is the real bigot here.
Well, then it's okay because he's got angel wings. We've been over this. He can do no wrong.
True. Yeah. I take his lead on this one. It is unknown how much of a threat, if at all, they remain to the people of the blood in the 41st millennium. Baal Secundus' primary settlement is the Angel's Fall, where Sanguinius' gestation capsule was first discovered over 10,000 Terran years ago, and the only point on the moon's surface where the Blood Angels still interact regularly with its people. To ascertain who is worthy to join the ranks of the Blood Angels, the adolescents of the feral tribes of Baal Secundus, who would be Blood Angels aspirants, take part in violent games and tournaments, battling against the harsh landscape and their peers. Baal Secundus has a large population, compared to the other worlds in the systems, of feral scavenger tribes who have to compete with vicious predators, such as the infamous fire scorpions. Needless to say, men from these tribes make formidable Space Marine aspirants. It is unknown how many of these people survived the devastation of Baal.
Yeah, so just a little more info on Baal there and his planets. This one's pretty neat. It's interesting, like how even after 10,000 years, Baal's pretty much the same place. Like Sanguinius had an effect, but I'm sure, after, he kind of had his situation wrapped up, the mutants start populating a little bit more. The place gets a little more dangerous. It doesn't become like a bastion of humanity again. It never becomes that again.
It's a good place to make soldiers.
Yeah.
It's a little known fact. The twin moons of Baal are actually known as Sanguinius balls. Sorry, I had to get that in before we moved on.
Yeah, great joke. Loved it. Loved every last ball. All right, the coming of the Emperor. And no, that's Coming, since you're sick out there, Christian. You're a sick man. Though the scattering of the Primarchs wounded the Emperor's designs deeply, he did not falter. The Primarchs could not be remade, but their genetic essence endured. And from it, the Emperor birthed the Space Marine Legions, warriors who would embody the greatness of the Primarchs, were meant to lead. With these sons of genius behind him, the Emperor began the Great Crusade in earnest. In the year 798 M30, he departed Terra, determined to reclaim the future of mankind and restore its lost unity across the stars. None could halt the tide of this righteous advance. Tyrants, Xenos, and demons crumbled before the relentless honor of the legions. Worlds once chained in terror turned their faces with joy to the rising light of the Imperium, and this grand endeavor unfolded. The Lost Primarchs were rediscovered, returning to their destined roles beside the Emperor to lead the legions born of their very blood. In his tireless journey to bring mankind together, the emperor never ceased to seek his scattered sons. In 843 M30, his unmatched psychic senses finally brought him to Baal. Landing at the Conclave of the Blood, he stepped into the amphitheater hewn from the Mount Seraph by Baal's tribes. Tens of thousands gathered to hear Sanguinius speak. Amid tattered robes and scarred warriors, the emperor stood, cloaked in gold but listening humbly. And as Sanguinius' words soared with purpose and love, igniting the crowd's very souls, he leapt into the sky above them, his wings spread wide in exultation, and the multitude cried out as one. The emperor knew that this angel was truly his son. While others among the primarchs had raged or doubted, Sanguinius did not. He looked upon the emperor and saw truth. Some believed his gift of foresight had long whispered of this meeting. He fell to his knees, tears like crystal streaming from his eyes into Baal's crimson dust. Where they touched the earth, pale blossoms bloomed, even in that poisoned soil. The emperor, moved by this vision, raised him up, looking into the faces of the blood. He saw reflections of their leader, strong of will and noble of heart. Damn, yeah, that's some imagery, like it's all perfect. You can't write it better. Every character knows exactly where to stand. They're like, okay, where's the best angle to get the light shining perfectly on my face as I soar it? It's all just cinematic. And then he starts crying and the blossoms. Yeah, fucking tight.
Yeah, there's almost like a biblical feel to it, right? Like it's like poetic and like grandiose, and
yeah, and I bet like these flowers, they put them in little stasis pods, and they're still somewhere in the Blood Angels Fortress Monastery. Like these relics, these
yeah, exactly. What I was gonna say.
I do also kind of like Sanguinius. Just as like a noble primarch and like someone who you'd almost like aspire to be like. I feel like there's other primarchs. I don't know, like Fulgrim, who's very vain. Yeah, and other primarchs who just like they might be very powerful and impressive, but they're not like noble and like
virtuous and
yeah. I hate to say virtuous in the 40K universe, but yeah, virtuous.
Yeah, he might be one of the few people that are like a good guy,
Yeah.
He feels bad about purging Xenos. He's still gonna do it, but he feels bad about it.
It's interesting too, like where he didn't land on a planet that mimics this mindset, this behavior, this imagery. He didn't land on a planet that was civilized, and he lands in this dirty, dusty, radiated place with broken people.
I think that is almost like the opposite of him, and like that's for the point. I think also the same could be said for Fulgrim, who landed on Chemos. That was like this also poisoned, toxic place that he turned into a beautiful place. Obviously not the case of Baal, but kind of similar idea where like it might not be either Primarchs land somewhere that meshes with who they are, and then that whole question of nature nurture, or they land somewhere like polar opposite to them that either accentuates the difference between them and the place that they landed. Even like you're saying, like that survivalist, like cannibalistic subcultures, contrarian to the like civilized and noble, right? Like they are very much contrasting ideas.
That is a good point. Like like Lionel Johnson. Can't remember the name of his planet, but that Caliban. Is like Caliban's like medieval, like he is. But then you have Baal, that is sort of the opposite of who Sanguinius is.
Yeah. He's like, no, we can't make this planet better. And one of my favorite moves is dust attack, and he fucking whips his wings and all the dust at the people.
Like a Pokemon.
Yeah, man, highly effective. Can't get rid of my dust.
All right, let's continue with the coming of the Emperor. From among these steadfast warriors, the finest were chosen to join the 9th Legion. They were given Sanguinius' gene seed, a sacred legacy of purity and strength. Thus were born the Blood Angels, raised alongside the sons of Terra and led to war beneath the angels' wings. With them, Sanguinius rejoined the Great Crusade, not as a conqueror, but as a beacon of mankind's highest virtues. Those who remained behind on Ball were charged with a sacred duty to preserve the truths of the Imperium and remember the angel who had walked among them. From that day to this, it is from Baal's moons that the Blood Angels draw their aspirants, seeking those worthy of their primarch's burden and grace. Clad in radiant gold and crowned in wings of alabaster, Sanguinius stood as the very image of nobility. With every step, he banished doubt, his presence and inspiration to all who marched at his side. His artificer armor was flawless, etched in symbols of hope and duty, gleaming across the brassarts and pauldrons with the quiet fire of reverence. At his breast shone a mighty ruby roundel, carved into the shape of a heart and mounted in a golden flame, a symbol of burning spirit that lived within the Ninth Legion and its primarch. Above it were 4 more ruby discs, honoring the worlds that had given the Legion its strength: Terra, Baal, and her twin moons. Draped across one shoulder was a black dappled cloak, with a pelt of a Carnodon slain in the icy wastes of Tagar Penteras. It had been his first battle beside his sons, and the beast his first kill. Even in war, the angel bore the weight of his calling with solemn grace.
Cool. That's a cool thing to kill.
A lot of that too comes from like some of the first depictions we have of Sanguinius. He's got that almost like a snow leopard looking beast, the Carnodon, like very prominently displayed on his shoulder. There's also an interesting allusion there with his armor too, with the flaming heart symbolism. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jordan, but I believe there's like I don't know if it's like a Holy Spirit or like a Jesus. I remember seeing like artwork. I don't know if it comes from like medieval Catholic imagery, but Jesus with like a flaming heart.
I'm not super familiar, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is.
Can always look it up, but maybe there's something to that if someone knows more.
Yeah. I'm not a Catholic
among us.
Yeah, I just looked it up. The symbolism of the Sacred Heart. It's a very Catholic.
Yeah. Okay. I have seen Catholic parishes called like something Sacred Heart.
Yeah, and it's like a lots of strong heart, blood, fire symbolism, light, radiant light. So obviously, and that the Christ symmetry also actually comes up later for Sanguinius. He shares both like Michael imagery and Christ imagery.
When looking at his symbol, I didn't always, but for a long time I thought him and Horus had the same symbol, because those tiny models, it's hard to tell the eye and the blood drop apart. Yeah, it's just so tiny, or just so
that always confused me too.
Yeah,
I'm like, why do they rock the same symbol?
But I pulled up a picture of that Carnodon, and it's fucking huge. I don't know if you can see those little Space Marine aspirants down below there.
Can you click on the image?
I can. I have that technology.
There you go. Oh yeah.
Look at that little naked pantsless man down there.
Oh, it's kind of like a tiger.
It looks like
tiger lion.
Yeah.
A liger.
Yeah.
A goddamn liger.
No, it's a saber-toothed liger, to be specific.
Yeah.
He looks like he looks like Lionel from Thundercats.
Oh my god, he killed Lionel and he's wearing them. That checks out though. I suppose.
Thunder.
Yeah. Oh my god.
All right, shall we get into the next era of his character, the Great Crusade? The Primarchs were more than warriors. They were visionaries and sovereigns of unmatched brilliance, whose presence multiplied the might of the Space Marine legions 100-fold. With their return, the Great Crusade surged with renewed purpose. New campaigns unfurled across the stars, guided by their strategic genius, and world after world was reclaimed in mankind's name. Among them stood Sanguinius, ever at the emperor's side, his blood angels serving not merely as warriors, but as the devoted honor guard to their father and creator. Though the Ninth Legion bore a fierce and fiery spirit, it was never unbridled savagery. The steady, empathetic hand of Sanguinius tempered their fury, shaping it into focused resolve. Their reputation as shock troops soon sparking a rivalry with the brutal world eaters. Yet they were always distinguished by restraint and grace, born of their primarch's wisdom. Over the long decades of the Great Crusade, Sanguinius was introduced to each of his lost brothers. He formed bonds of genuine kinship with Horus, Layman Russ, Jagadi Khan, as the Blood Angels did with the Luna Wolves, Space Wolves, and White Scars, respectively. Still, early in the telling of his legend, Sanguinius was already recognized as the most noble among them. The Emperor held him in high council, and many came to believe that the angel alone carried a fragment of their father's hopes, untouched by ambition. Even Horus, first among the primarchs, sensed in Sanguinius a brilliance and purity beyond his own reach, a harmony with the emperor that eluded the rest, while others fought for conquest, for glory, or for the joy of battle. Sanguinius bore a heavier vision, a united mankind, bound by peace, elevated beyond war. His heart beat for the golden age to come, but the stars held darker truths, and the dawn he dreamed would never break. Those who first laid eyes upon him often mistook him for being a myth. Sanguinius's countenance inspired reverence, and in his bearing was something celestial, an echo of destiny, a beauty that veiled the sorrow he carried within. As the Imperium expanded and more primarchs joined the Emperor's cause, the burden of rule grew. The Emperor, ever pulled in many directions, began to delegate. His most trusted son, Horus, was increasingly placed in command of the Crusade's operations. His brilliance at war securing the loyalty and respect of both primarchs and legions alike.
Yeah, cool. He just kind of shows up. Everyone naturally likes him. And then his warriors fight with savagery, but they're not savage. They're savages. They're smart. The one interesting thing about like these legions that he really kind of latches onto, it was Horus's legion, the Luna Wolves. It was the White Scars, Jerkati, Layman Russ, and the Wolves. And then the last one was oh no, that's it. So it's those three, but they're all very savage legions themselves. Like obviously the Space Wolves and the White Scars, but even like Horus's legions were pretty brutal in their own way, though. And it's just like, yeah, this angel likes hanging out with these like really like brute people. It seems.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like Horus, like the goal of him and his legion is more to wage war, and yes, they're very like strategic, and they may not be as like reckless as other legions, but they are very much a warlike legion, where it seems like Sanguinius more so is like he wants to civilize the empire, right, as opposed to just conquer Xenos.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we should also note too, obviously we'll get into this more in the Blood Angel Legion episode, but they weren't always like this. They were previously a lot more savage. And again, that's that contrasting nature, but not to give too much away for future episodes.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. He kind of earns his place All the Primarchs get to respect him. I think he meets a lot of them. Like he shows up very early in the Crusade, so he gets to meet a lot of the different Primarchs. And yeah, just kind of everyone all around great guy. Glowing reviews.
Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, they all like him. He almost has that Horus effect where like even the ones that are more what do you call it, like loner types who don't like anyone or get along with very few, like Perturabo or Angron, I think even they have a measure of respect at a minimum, if not admiration, for Sanguinius.
Yeah. Before we get further into the episode, people in the chat are dying to know, Christian, how do you fare in a fight against a Liger?
Oh, not very well. As someone else pointed out, Ligers are huge. It's weird. A lot of crossbreeds tend to be like more in the middle. So if you have like a horse and a donkey, the mule will be like not as big as a horse, but bigger than a donkey. You get kind of that.
Yeah, it's like the average of the donkey.
Yeah, you get more of a dumbed down version. But with Ligers, they end up bigger than both. It's super strange.
Yeah,
they're actually like more powerful and like worse than tigers and lions. And no,
Ligers can't. Am I correct? Ligers can't procreate.
I don't think any hybrid species can procreate. That's one of the factors.
Yeah.
So like mules, Ligers.
Yeah.
There's a few others, crossbreeds. I think there's a word for them.
Yeah,
good thing the Primarchs don't procreate.
Hybrids.
Yeah, and that's why me and the chickens out back have never procreated. Just
Tigons are also the inverse too. They have Ligers, or I believe a male lion and a female tiger, and Tigons are a male tiger with a Tigons are a male lion and a female tiger. So you can get either one. Fun fact. Not that I've run cat breeding experiments in my basement or anything.
No. Tristan asks, with Sanguinius being the figurehead more than War Master, do you think the Emperor built more understanding of his vision into him? That deep care for humanity, perhaps? Yeah, once again, that's like that nurture nature. No, I think it's kind of just warp, man. Like I think he gets flung into the warp and then he sees across time, essentially. And
it makes him compassionate.
No, that just
makes him grow real cool angel wings.
You can kind of go one of two ways when you know your fate. You know, you can meet it head on, and like you ultimately know, well, I'm not going to die until that moment, and I know that moment is not today. So you can live your life very confidently. Or you could be a little bitch like Conrad Kurz and look into the future and think you're going to die and then go murder a planet.
And become hyper paranoid. Yeah.
Yeah. There's kind of two ways to deal with this. Like you see your own death. So yeah, I think he gets flung into the warp. That gives him this foresight across time. And then, you're left with two choices. And thankfully he chose the right one, just go forward.
I like that interpretation, but I don't know that I fully agree with it, only because we know that some of the Primarchs, if not all the Primarchs, were built with a purpose in mind. And like that does make sense. And you can see it, whereas like kind of Jordan pointed out earlier, like Horus is a conqueror, but he lacks that, like, he's got a charismatic edge, but he lacks the same compassionate edge that Sanguinius would be a good ruler. He'd be a good prince or a good king, making the best judgment that, is the most just for everyone involved, versus one who's just so heavy-handed that, yes, he does get the bad guys, but he might catch some of the good guys in his judgments, or is almost too cruel, or someone who's so compassionate and lacks that, it's a free-for-all and there is no law. I feel like Sanguinius is like the compassionate and wise ruler versus like Horus conqueror.
It's hard to say if he could have been like the same kind of conqueror that Horus is, who's very calculating and brutal, and will make whatever decisions are necessary to achieve.
Yeah. And it's important to note that Horus would be ineffective conqueror, right? You have someone like Genghis Khan, right? Like they're good at what they do. There's no one better, but there's going to be a lot of skull piles in the midst of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So they go crusading. We'll do a little quick talk about the Blood Angels. We will do 2 episodes just like every other Legion. But this will hold you over for a hot second. Throughout the Great Crusade, the Blood Angels were renowned as one of the most noble and exemplary legions of the Imperium. Their every campaign a fusion of martial excellence and sublime discipline. Under their leadership of Sanguinius, they became more than conquerors. They were liberators, warriors who fought not for dominance, but for the unity and elevation of mankind. Where others brought compliance through terror and brute force, the Blood Angels sought honor in every engagement, striving to preserve rather than destroy. Their striking appearance and angelic imagery often inspired awe among the liberated, while their conduct in war earned them the respect even in rival legions. Yeah, they never kneecapped anyone. It was all headshots, no suffering, just quick kills. Yet beneath their radiant image lay the quiet tragedy of their primarch's foresight, a shadow that hung over their glories, deepening their resolve with every world they brought into the Emperor's light. Yeah, the Blood Angels are pretty cool. We haven't talked about the Blood Rage or the Black Rage and the Red Thirst yet, and we probably won't really yet, but
Yeah,
they got stuff going on.
Not to bring back the conversation to what we were discussing earlier there, but Alpha Primus in the chat says, does Big E compassionate about humanity or more concerned about controlling? I think that comes down to like all the Primarchs being a part of the Emperor as a whole. And yes, the Emperor that we come to know, and again, some of it gets messed up with like too much detail, things changing through the Horus Heresy novelizations. But I think the original idea was that all the Primarchs would have represented an aspect of the Emperor, and Sanguinius would have been that noble ruler aspect that does get lost.
Yeah,
and
I do.
It's lost.
I do think, like, according to canon, the Emperor does legitimately have compassion for humanity and like actually cares for and loves humanity. But that's how I would read his character.
Yeah, and his characterization gets kind of butchered around too, depending on the author and like what's his true intent. Is he a clinical machine that
I
sees
know,
humanity
yeah,
as a means to an end, or is he also trying to do good but just does a horrible job of it, or anything? There's a whole
I feel okay. Putting that aside, but if you just say like rely on codexes or something, I do feel like he's supposed to love humanity. Like that is, and his ultimate purpose is for like the good of humanity and to be the rulers of the galaxy.
I like that one line at the beginning where he rose above the tribes and looked down at them like a god. Well, I forget the exact wording, but yeah, like when he kind of does that, yeah, he looks down at them and he doesn't like see them as ants, but like is like, yeah, that compassion. He just feels like he is elevated above them for sure, but now he has responsibility to them as well.
It's like they're his children,
Yeah.
All right, back to the Blood Angel Legion. Let's get into some notable campaigns. Sanguinius and the Blood Angels were involved in many campaigns during the Great Crusade and often found themselves fighting alongside other legions quite often. Below are some battles of note. The Conquest of Neptune. An ancient world by Imperial standards, Neptune was first colonized by humanity during the Age of Terra. During the Age of Strife, the planet's inhabitants were mutated into hideous, inhuman creatures. During the early Great Crusade, the task of conquering Neptune and its moons, as well as scouring its mutant hordes, fell to the vicious Ninth Legion. In the tunnels of Neptune's moons, the Ninth Legion fought a bloody war that saw 12,000 battle brothers lost. Yet by the time the Imperial reinforcements arrived, the Legion still endured and had succeeded in its mission. They had also replenished their numbers by recruiting among many of the dregs of Neptune. 12,000 Space Marines, that's a lot.
Yeah, that's a bad day. Yeah, it's just a lot of guys. There's some stuff that happens to the Blood Angels. We'll keep this battle in the back of your mind, and specifically that 12,000 battle brothers lost. We'll get back to some losses that have more critical impact. Yeah. There's a question. Do you think that all the lore jumble of the Emperor split into people's perception is to split people's perception of the Big E so that they lean more towards traitor or loyalist mindset?
Well, hold on. Let me just. You guys could give your take on this, but I do feel like this is just what authors like to do is they like to subvert expectations. So they will try and uh beg the question about whether his intentions are really good. That's my personal view of it. Is you're just watching authors. I guess what they're saying is canon technically, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I thought.
I'll give your take, Mark, before I drop mine.
I think it's just impossible to keep everything in order, across 30 years of writing, 35 years of writing, multiple authors. It's just an impossible task.
Yeah, I would say it was probably unintentional. You see that a lot with Star Wars too, where you have like multiple cooks in the kitchen, different characterizations of the same character, different authors' interpretations. Like Jordan said, people trying to subvert, like, aha, you thought he was compassionate all along. Really, he's a clinical machine. But I do think that that's a way fans can cope and kind of like, oh, they're all true and they're all different, and it depends on your perspective, and like that's one way to kind of make it work. I don't hate it, I don't love it, but it's kind of dealing with the cards we have dealt right now.
Yeah. All right, let's get into the Melchior. How do you guys say that? Melchior compliance. The planet Melchior was founded by the Imperium during the Great Crusade era. At the time, the human population on the planet had been consumed by the Nephilim Xenos race. Oh, another biblical allusion. Eventually, the Blood Angels and Luna Wolves Space Marine legions were able to defeat the Nephilim. The current status of the planet is unknown.
Yeah, so like I was saying at the beginning of this episode, there wasn't many battles that I could find during the Great Crusade. It's just that illusion of greatness. But the first battle we have, they fight a bunch of mutants. The second one, they fight Nephilim, or like angel people. We did do an episode on them in the Minor Xenos or whatever. And yeah, like these like psychic angel vampires. So, now he's battling an image of himself or an image of the people. It's these kind of interesting patterns that happen.
It is I will just say there is like a view among maybe biblical scholars, so the Nephilim in Genesis 6, I think it is, where they're like the sons of God came to the daughters of men and procreated with them and created the Nephilim. So the Nephilim are like a hybrid human species with angelic beings. I almost feel like Space Marines or even Primarchs fit the bill of Nephilim more than the Nephilim Xenos. But anyways, just a thought there. But I digress.
Yeah. I like it. The compliance of Muspel. Muspel is an Imperial warlord brought into compliance by the Blood Angels Legion during the Great Crusade. At that time, Muspel's population had regressed into barbarity and dwelled in the ruins of the Dark Age cities. The Blood Angels remarked that they cried out to primitive gods that abandoned them, but were remarkably passive and bore no weapons at all. Because of this, Muspel was easily brought into compliance and then rebuilt by the Imperium. However, in later years after the Great Crusade, the Dark Angels Primarch Lionel Johnson investigated strange disappearances of unrest occurring around the world. It eventually became apparent that the Crave infestation had erupted on Muspel. And now we get the next little weird pattern that ultimately means nothing, but now we got them fighting like actual vampire bats.
Yeah. The defense of Helioret. The defense of Helioret was a battle of the Great Crusade in 962 M30. The insane witch idols of the Eldar craft world Magic Citharol led a brutal campaign of raids against Helioret, forcing the Blood Angels and Ordo Sinister to defeat the Xenos and cast their craft world into a nearby star. That is hilarious.
Yeah, fucking cool. Ordo Sinister is the Titan legions with psychic powers. Pretty cool. That'd be quite the battle of the Order Sinister versus Wraithbone
witches.
Titans and witches, and yeah, fucking
I
cool.
think they just launched their craft world into the star using their psychic might. It's like burning its jet engines trying to get away, but they're like psychically pushing it towards a star, and it's just like a slow motion disaster. But
I love it.
Yeah.
All right, the Praxil compliance. It was a war fought by the Emperor's children during the Great Crusade. As soon as the Imperium made contact with the Praxil, it was clear that whoever brought the system into compliance would gain great renown. Wanting to secure the planet's wealth intact, it was ultimately chosen that the Emperor's children would undertake the operation, supported by elements of the Imperial Army and Mechanicum under Lord Commander Idenam. Initially, the campaign did not begin well, despite meticulous planning, with attacks on outer moons and void stations repelled with significant losses. Idenam reassessed his enemy and planned accordingly, instead seeking to destroy the Praxil space fleet instead of waging a mass invasion. But the Praxil anticipated his move and used multiple strike groups to attack the Imperial fleet as it gathered. Suicide teams boarded key Imperial vessels and killed command crews, while others packed with explosives launched kamikaze runs. Idenam's fleet managed to survive, but repairs forced back his schedule significantly. It was then that elements of the Blood Angels under Raldoron and Imperial Fists under Casimus arrived to aid the Emperor's children, much to the frustration of Idenam. Worse, Idenam learned it had been Fulgrim who himself who requested the aid. The reinforcements put themselves under Idenam's command, but it was nonetheless a wound to his pride. The revised plan combined both mass invasion and the destruction of the Praxil fleet. It fell within 3 weeks of this new counteroffensive, which saw exemplary performance by all involved. Idenam was praised for the battle and recommended to the War Council for honoring. However, before the formalities could be completed, he departed the theater, forcing Raldoron to accept the sword of the last tyrant of Praxil. The Lord Commander is said to have never acknowledged the victory as one of his honors. So this is kind of just like I don't know, like the Blood Angels weren't even super involved. They just came to bail out the
Yeah, and like Sanguinius specifically, like I don't even really know if he was there. Like I said, I was trying to reach for information, but there are some things about this battle. Like we got Ralladorion. I forget how to say his name.
Raldoron.
Yeah. He's a pretty cool character, like prominent. He's your equivalent to like Lucius or like all your kind of heroes. I don't.
Sigismund.
Sigismund.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, cool character. But yeah, it was kind of another one of those like, okay, you're telling me that Sanguinius does all this stuff, but what does he do? He's not in this battle. Same with the Ulanor Crusade. Like, he kind of has an appearance and stuff, but like, we'll read it and we'll see more.
He's too busy being a beacon of hope and light to the rest of the conquered people. So that's what he's.
But what does he do? Is he just like hovering around the planet like this little star in the sky? And, yeah.
You know what, Christian? He attends charity dinners and cuts ribbons. Okay.
Raises awareness.
That's my most despised kind of politician, by the way.
God damn. The Ulanor Crusade. Among the brightest triumphs of the Great Crusade was the Ulanor campaign, the vast and terrible war against the Orc Empire of Orlak Uruk. Ulanor Prime, heart of the alien dominion, became the crucible of the final victory. The scale of battle was immense: 100,000 Space Marines, 8 million Imperial Army troops, and 100 war titans of the Legio Mortis, and 600 vessels of the Imperialis Armada were unleashed upon the enemy in a tide of fire and steel. In the aftermath of the grand victory, the Emperor bestowed upon Horus the title of War Master, elevating him above all others and entrusting him with supreme command of the Great Crusade. At the triumph of Ulanor, celebrations filled the stars, but they marked a turning point for soon after. The Emperor departed from the front lines to return to Terra, retreating into secrecy to labor upon the Imperial Warblade project, a hidden ambition to shelter humanity from the warp and bind them in more tightly than ever before. Yet his silence wounded the hearts of his sons. In his absence, confusion and resentment took root. He did not share his vision with them, for his silence grew for from that silence grew shadows, resentments that had festered into betrayal. After Horus was mortally wounded on the plague moon of Davin, the dark gods of chaos found their moment. They whispered to the fallen War Master, offering the galaxy in exchange for his soul. Thus, the Horus heresy that would have shattered the Imperium would happen. Even as brother turned upon brother, Sanguinius did not falter. While others wavered, the Blood Angels remained steadfast, honor-bound, burdened with grief, but unbroken. Little burdened with grief, no big deal, but unbroken. And at the Emperor's side, they endured. So yeah, we'll get into the Horus Heresy timelines in the event of that. And yeah, like he has his moments in the Horus Heresy. Like he becomes one of the coolest Primarchs in the Horus Heresy with all the different battles that he does and like different comebacks and like a couple rocky moments where he has to do a training montage and then beat up this next guy. Like, yeah, he goes hard. I got a cool quote here, and it's from War Master Horus, because this last little bit was really about the crowning of Horus instead of, not the crowning, but the titling of Horus instead of who everyone thinks should have been the War Master, Sanguinius. So this is the quote from Horus. Sanguinius, it should have been him. He had the vision and strength to carry us to victory, and the wisdom to rule once victory is won. For all his aloof coolness, he alone has the Emperor's soul in his blood. Each of us carries part of our father within us, whether it's his hunger for battle, his psychic talent, or his determination to succeed. Sanguinius holds it all. It should have been his. That's a very old quote. Like Sanguinius has always been portrayed in this light of he should have been the War Master. He was the perfect son. Where Lionel Johnson would have made a great War Master, but what happens when the war is over? Where Sanguinius can still he has that wisdom to carry the future forward,
He turns into an overweight alcoholic. That's why.
His wings don't lift him barely off the ground no more.
Yeah. No, Lionel Johnson is a great general, but is he a good ruler? That goes back to something I said earlier in the episode about who has a wisdom to be a good king.
Yeah.
And on that, or say your thought.
Yeah. So that's kind of the Ulanor Crusade. Like, the Blood Angels, I believe, were in that campaign, but yeah, nothing too special once again happened with him. It was more just he should have been named.
Yeah. Alpha Primus in the chat says, is he able to metaphysically manipulate his legion? Talking about Sanguinius, is the hope he inspires in them something he enhancing mentally or just a natural occurrence? I think all the Primarchs do have a metaphysical aura. You often hear it described in the books of how their sons are just compelled to obey or have this innate reverence for their gene father. So I think it's both, because it's not just his legion that has this affection for him, it's all people. And again, without the evidence of why he is this beacon of hope for the Imperium, it's hard to say. But I would imagine he has done noble things and made noble proclamations and judgments and all that fun stuff all the little details that make a character. That presumably is why he's so beloved, not just by his legion, but by the Imperium as a whole.
He fly, he attack, but most importantly, he has the Emperor's back. And that was Sanguinius enthusiast's comment. Yeah.
We got a
That's why he's the
Sanguinius
best.
propagandist here.
Yeah.
He doesn't need a propagandist. Everything he's done is true and noble. He writes his own. His life is his own propaganda.
His tears make flowers. I seen it with my own 5 eyes.
That's your local resident of Ball. All right. Let's get into his personality and what makes him such a good ruler, or thought of as a good ruler. Sanguinius was a being of profound nobility and compassion, whose soul seemed too pure for the brutal age into which he was cast. Though a warrior without peer, he carried himself with humility and grace, ever seeking peace with where others sought conquest. His presence inspired loyalty not through fear, but through love. His warriors followed him not only because he was mighty, but because he was just. He possessed a prophetic gift that allowed him glimpses of dark futures, and his foresight weighed heavily upon him, instilling a quiet sorrow behind the radiant countenance. Yet even burdened by such knowledge, Sanguinius never wavered in his duty, standing as a beacon of hope and honor amidst the growing shadows of the Imperium. To his brothers, he was both confidant and conscience. To the Emperor, he was the closest in spirit, a son not only of war, but of wisdom and sacrifice. His compassion. Sanguinius is deeply cared for his legion, his fellow primarchs, and humanity as a whole. He was known for his empathy, often going out of his way to understand and support others emotionally and morally. Noble and honorable, he upheld a strong sense of duty, virtue, and moral integrity. Sanguinius conducted himself with grace and dignity even in the face of overwhelming darkness, earning the respect and admiration of nearly everyone in the Imperium. And his prophecy as a burden. He was gifted with visions of the future. Sanguinius often foresaw tragic events, including his own death. This trait gave him a quiet solemnity, and inner sadness as he carried the weight of fate without letting it break his spirit.
Yeah, a couple cool little things about him for sure. That burden of grief is always interesting because like no one around him would know except maybe his closest confidant, and even then, like, does a guy like that even have confidants? You know?
Yeah, there's again that like kind of similarity with like Jesus, like carrying this burden. Jesus knows he's gonna die, but like all his closest friends and disciples don't know he's gonna die.
But until then, he's gonna turn water into wine and party. But then,
like the Garden of Gethsemane, like he sweats blood or whatever. But
yeah, there's like that tragedy behind the divinity aspect.
All right, let's get into the powers of our beloved savior.
Can Sanguinius turn water into wine? We need to know. That's why he's beloved of the Imperium.
Trust me, the only way I could do it is to pee into it.
As a Primarch, Sanguinius possessed strength, speed, and endurance far beyond any mortal. His every movement infused with divine precision. In battle, he was a blur of gold and crimson, capable of cleaving through entire enemy formations with ease. His mastery of weaponry was unmatched, and his command presence elevated those around him, turning his legion into a force of disciplined fury. Even among his gene sire's creations, Sanguinius stood apart, blessed with both unmatched martial prowess and unshakable moral core. Flight. Sanguinius was unique among the Primarchs for his angelic wings, a physical gift that allowed him true flight. With them, he could soar over battlefields, descending with righteous fury or rising like a vision of salvation. His wings were not mere ornament. They were tools of war and symbols of hope. As capable of delivering death as they were of lifting hearts. In the sky, he was awe-inspiring, a being who seemed less a man and more a myth, in motion. Foresight. Sometimes gift, sometimes curse, the winged sire of the blood angels was among that small number of primarchs able to glimpse what was to come to pass. A sliver of the psychic prescient talent held their own father, the emperor himself. Through this ability, Sanguinius saw many things, echoes of dark futures and grim fates that haunted his dreams and drove him to act in ways that oftentimes seemed strange to his brothers. He could not guide his foresight or direct it to see where he would. It came to him unreliably and without his will or control. It taunted him with dire premonitions, beset him with doubts over his choices, and yet to many it was seen as a gift. It was a burden borne by the Primarch, almost alone, for his own gene sons, next to none, inherited the talent. Of that tiny handful that did, it was little more than a fragment, a tiny scrap of sight.
Alpha Primus says, in all honesty, it seems like him and Cruz are meant to be polar opposites. If Sanguinius represents the best parts of Big E, then Cruz represents his worst parts. Yeah. Because even the Emperor had this foresight ability, and it got clouded or whatever at some points. But, you know, he still kind of uses it to the betterment and not like, oh, it's going to be Grimdark 40K. Fuck, I guess I'll just go murder some planets.
Although it could be argued that his, it's that like classic tragedy where like he almost causes his own fate by trying to intervene in it. So there's that.
Yeah, so maybe it's more of that middle path then.
Yeah,
as opposed to
either one. And I do like that comparison you made earlier on of Curse and Sanguinius. And I do think there is a parallel between them. One, like you said, is that bat wings. The other one's like angelic wings, like light and dark contrast. I wouldn't go as far though as saying as Curse represents the dark elements of the Emperor. I would say it's like justice run amok. Right, where it's like justice that's devoid completely of any form of compassion. It's just the executioner's blade, right? Like,
yeah,
you could argue he's not wrong. He's just taking it so far. Like, yeah, you steal a piece of bread and you lose your hands, right? Like, is that sure? That's justice.
Good news.
Paper, but
get to now eat your hands.
Yeah, there you go. That's something for you to eat. Yeah,
yeah.
So,
yeah, we'll definitely talk more about his foresight. Like this whole episode, I've been trying to avoid what really happens to him. But next episode we'll be able to talk a little bit more about the foresight and all that.
Everyone getting blue balls.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Blue wings, maybe even. Appearance. Sanguinius was a vision of angelic majesty, a being whose very presence stirred awe and reverence. Towering and radiant, he was fair of face and form, with skin like polished ivory and long golden hair that shimmered in the light of distant suns. His most striking feature, however, were the vast feathered wings that unfurled from his back. Pure white, vast and powerful, yet graceful beyond imagining. In motion, he seemed more like a celestial being than a creature of flesh and blood, and those that looked upon him often fell silent, overcoming the impossible beauty of the solemn sorrow in his eyes. There was a divine sadness into Sanguinius, as though he bore the burden none could see, and yet he carried it with grace and serenity that inspired all who stood in his shadow. I feel like I read this, but I could be wrong. We'll get to it eventually. There's a relic in the Blood Angel Monastery, and it's Sanguinius's, one of the feathers from Sanguinius's wings, and it's a meter-long feather, which is pretty fucking cool. And like, yeah, you could use it as a sword. Like the quill end of it is like, you're not snapping that. That's metal, man. Like, not really, but like, yeah, pretty cool. But light, strong as how do you describe Mithril? That's his wings, essentially.
Light as a feather, but hard as dragon scale.
Yes, perfect. So he wears the regalia resplendent. The regalia resplendent was more than mere armor. It was a relic of unmatched craftsmanship, a radiant fusion of artistry and war. Forged to reflect the spirit of its wearer, the golden battle plate gleamed with ethereal brilliance, etched with sacred symbols and delicate filigree that traced the tales of the Ninth Legion. Upon the chest shone a massive ruby shaped into the burning heart set in gold flames, the living emblem of the Blood Angel's spirit. 4 smaller rubies disc adorned it, honoring the worlds from which the Legion drew strength, Terra, Baal, and her 2 moons. Across one shoulder hung the black-spotted pelt of the mighty Carnodon, his first kill beside his Legion, marking not only his prowess but his deep bond with his sons. The armor was both protection and a proclamation, declaring Sanguinius not only as a warrior but as a symbol of light in an age darkened by endless war. Yeah, very cool look. Very cool look. He's some of the Primarch models, like, you know, we've been doing this so long where we didn't have models or artwork of what they look like. Some came out and you're like, oh, that's definitely not what I was picturing. Where's his mustache? Where's the Rogaldorn mustache? You know, but Sanguinius is perfect. Like, he's exactly how I picture him. You know, good job.
Yeah,
it's something like we can all agree on that image. You know.
I do. Well, actually, I have a funny point. I'm gonna.
You son of a bitch.
Here. But I do. I think Sanguinius was one of the few Primarchs that did have like very clear artwork of him. And I think that's why it meshes so well with our vision of him. And then also it leans so heavily in the Michael the Archangel imagery that it even the model itself. Mark, I don't know if you want to pull up a picture of the Forge World model. But it leans so heavy in that Michael the Archangel imagery that like even his posing is very reminiscent of like classical art of Michael. There's a lot of paintings and sculptures of Michael where he's in a very similar pose with either a sword or a spear with like a dragon or Satan or that kind of figure underneath him. Like it's a very classic interpretation, and that's why it meshes so well with like your preconceived idea of what Sanguinius ought to look like, because you have like this whole Western canon of Michael imagery. But outside of that, I was gonna bring up very early in the Horus Heresy books, they describe him at the Council of Nicaea with jet black hair, which I remember threw me off when reading it, and a lot of people off reading it. Yeah. And I think there was an attempt very early on in the Horus Heresy novel series to really break away from what people had envisioned with the Primarchs.
Yeah, it's that subversive instinct.
It is 100%. But I get it though, because I think their whole aim was to show how, and we kind of got this from our conversation with Rick Priestley, of how long it's been since the Horus Heresy actually happened, that so many details would have been lost over time. That even like the depictions, right? Like oftentimes Christianity is criticized for its like depictions of Jesus in medieval art, which obviously comes from like a European context, where they would have that kind of same thing where like, oh, you don't even know what Sanguinius actually looked like. It's been, 10,000 years since the Horus Heresy happened. How much of that is even true? The physical characteristics of these people and all that. I think that's what that was an attempt at. They did retcon it later, even within the Horus Heresy series, where he allegedly, there's 2 interpretations. One is that he had dyed his hair in mourning, and the other is that he can change his hair color based on like his emotional state.
Alpha Prime disagrees with your dyeing hair comment.
That's kind of gay, to be honest. A little bit gay.
Yeah, but it's funny, like, we're backlashing against that. Like, I've never heard anyone wanting a black-haired Sanguinius, but I have heard people comment on Rogaldorn facial hair. So I do know people are commenting on the hairstyles of Primarchs.
It is an important fact that cannot be downplayed.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, the dyes the hair in mourning, we can live with it. But there's that classic image.
What if Horus just all of a sudden appeared with like Timothy
full head of hair.
Charlemagne, like curly hair?
And that's what his movie interpretation is going to be, and I'm going to hate it.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
I
pretty
am
boy.
the
Yeah.
Horus Heresy. God,
Awful stuff. Stay away.
awful.
Right. All right, let's talk about Sanguinius' war gear. Every piece of Sanguinius' war gear was a reflection of his divine heritage and martial perfection. Crafted with artistry befitting a demigod, his arms were not merely tools of destruction, but symbols of purity and purpose. Clad in the regalia resplendent and wielding weapons of legend, Sanguinius embodied the emperor's wrath and mercy in equal measure. He chose arms varied depending on the battle's needs, for he was master of every form of combat, able to strike down foes with speed and grace few could comprehend. Whether with blade or spear, he fought not for glory, but for the hope of mankind and the future he yearned to protect. Each weapon he bore an extension of his will and his burden. The blade and carmine. The blade and carmine was a favored sword of Sanguinius, a weapon of ancient provenance and unmatched elegance. Forged in the forgotten depths of the Great Crusade, its edge shimmered with crimson hue, as though forever stained by righteous blood. Though it sang in battle, it was a savage thing. It was precise, graceful, a weapon of judgment. In the hands of the great angel, it became a symbol of salvation and fury. Its every cutting arc cutting through the enemies of mankind with poetic finality. Many who beheld it in motion believed it to glow, not with fire or plasma, but with the light of Sanguinius' unbreakable spirit. It was as much a relic of hope as it was an instrument of war.
Nice. Another little one of those like mythical moments of like, so he's making his sword glow. Like, okay,
Yeah.
Love it.
The Spear of Telesto. Gifted to Sanguinius by the emperor himself, the Spear of Telesto was a weapon of immense power and sacred significance. Its haft was wrought from unknown alloys, strong enough to withstand the fury of titans, while its blades shone with starlight and carried the weight of ancient oaths. The spear was not merely destructive, it was transcendent. In battle, it crackled with energy potent enough to pierce the hides of void beasts and shatter demon-forged armor. Yet to Sanguinius, it was more than a weapon. It was a promise. He wielded it as a guardian of the Imperium's future, casting it not in hatred, but in solemn necessity. When he raised the Spear of Telesto, it was as though the Emperor's own hand moved through him, a strike of destiny upon the battlefield. Yeah, so again, kind of speaking to that Michael imagery, he always typically depicted with a sword or a spear. Sanguinius is very much a blend of like Jesus and Michael, because the spear also has some significance as a Catholic relic. The spear that like pierces Christ's side is like a well-known relic as well, and that's similar to like the Spear of Telesto imagery. Not quite one for one, but you can see like the very heavy Catholic medieval art influences with Sanguinius.
Yeah. Sanguinius Enthusiast asked, do you think the blade in Carmine could have been something like a force sword, which he channeled his own psychic potential through? I like, yes, but maybe not in the way the force sword works. I think it's literally like he's supposed to be that glowing, radiant angel. Like he is glowing, so he has the ability to make things around him like just glow. Like he just has that warp power, I think. So I don't think he's actually like channeling his energy into it intentionally. It's more of just like, maybe another example is when the emperor has the ability to change his form to like appear to however he needs to people. It's like that, except he's always putting on the radiant angel awe look, which includes a glowing sword. That's in my mind, at least. Cool. Well, we made it to the end of part 1 of Sanguinius. Yeah, pretty slow. Starts slow, but I'm telling you, it gets wild in the next part once brother on brother start fighting and the demons make appearances. Yeah, there's starts to get some wild things happening. But things I really enjoyed about it, just going through, was the mythos, man. I've said it before, I'll say it again. And we touched a couple of them. In part 2, there's a lot more, but like the crying blossoms, the glowing sword, these little things that just seem so supernatural, so godlike. Or divine maybe is a better word, not godlike, but like divine.
Yeah, absolutely. On the note of hold on, let me find it here. I just wanted to share with everyone a little something here. Let me find it. Sorry.
All good.
While you do, okay, never mind. Here, do that. I regret letting you do that.
There's what the writers would do with Horace if they could have their way.
Beautiful. Purple hair.
They turn him
rugged.
they turn him into a college gender studies teacher.
Listen, you must comply with our gender identity. They're going around bringing compliance. Cut off your children's genitals. Anyways, that's a wild tangent. We don't need to go on. Yeah, fun episode. I don't know what else to say. How to get off that child joke, but we're moving forward. Foresight. Cruz and Sanguinius. Yeah, we've talked about it a little bit. We'll talk about it again, just kind of the difference. And then even the Emperor, that's a good little kind of middle ground that you kind of found there with him, how he deals with knowledge of the future. Yeah, what are you guys' thoughts on this little part one?
Yeah, I really like that Conrad Kerr's Sanguinius comparison. Actually, it reminds me of a quote by one of my favorite authors, Machiavelli. It's often like a misinterpreted quote, but the whole question of whether it's better to be feared than loved. On the one hand, you have the fear, you have the way that Conrad Kerr chooses to rule, and the way that Sanguinius is obviously to be loved. It's often a misunderstood quote, though. Everyone always thinks he's saying to be feared, but the ideal is to be both. And if you can't do both, then it's safer to be feared, but not to go overboard with fear, because then you embitter people to rebel against you. So there's a full context, but it's a very well-known quote by Machiavelli. And I think those two really embody the spirit of that quote, of whether it's better to be one or the other.
Yeah, interesting. I like that.
Yeah, no, I really like Sanguinius. I always have. He's sort of on my Mount Rushmore of primarchs. So.
Who are they, Jordan? Remind everyone.
I like Sanguinius. I really like Jagati Khan. And then the names are skipping. I like Lionel Johnson. And then there's a couple others I like, but those guys are kind of
jumping out. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, Sanguinius. You know him, you love him, you want to hear more. Can't wait to find out what happens to him.
I'm sure he will go on to lead the Imperium into an age of knowledge and reason.
Yes, hope and beauty.
Yes.
Alpha Primus sorry, this isn't quite Warhammer related, but Alpha Primus says Machiavelli is extremely misunderstood, which I totally agree. I read The Prince a few years back now, and I was like, oh, like this is not how I pictured Machiavelli to be.
Yeah. But
yeah, there's a very narrow view, quote mining Machiavelli and that people do, and sort of create a persona, and then the whole there's a whole adjective named after Machiavellian, right? But that actually isn't what Machiavelli actually advocated for. So
a conspiracy is at foot to slander the man.
Join Jordan's book club to find out more.
I might just have to.
But I totally agree. But just read The Prince. It's actually not as diabolical as.
It's also not that long. It's a pretty
no.
Book, actually.
Yeah, it's fairly easy.
I love it. Yeah, I have 3 copies of
it. It honestly, most of it is just like how to be a good politician, and just to how to manage your state well.
Effectively.
Yeah. It's not even like it's like good at like just good sound leadership advice. It's
Yeah.
not even like
He was the original like power CEO, like writing his book about like
yeah, exactly.
how to
So
take over
funny.
your company and
Yeah.
Oh my god.
make it the best company in the world. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Go from
Yeah.
0 to hero in 7 days. Fuck.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I won't read that book, but I'm glad you guys liked it. Well, let's move on to the end of the show, the part of the night where we say adios and good night. And if you still want to listen to us, go check out Lorehammer Listener Lore podcast. There's some homebrew listener lore there. You can go check that out.
And if you want to hear me and Jordan wax poetic about Star Wars, come listen to us at Star Lores, where we delve into the deep mythos of the Star Wars universe and Machiavelli at some points.
Cool. And special thanks to all the Patreon members. I used to always read the names at the end. We are getting Patreon members still, in case anyone's curious. But you can join. Maybe I'll just stack up a bunch of names and read them off at one point once a month or something. My inbox of emails just gets flooded, so it's hard to sometimes do. Where are all these Patreon things? So, but thank you to all the.
You should just do a whole hour's worth of just reading off Patreon names.
Yes, now that's the worst bonus episode ever, but I'm in for it. I think I'll make Trevor Buzak do that episode. He seems suited for it. All right. Well, we'll see you on the next Blood Angel episode, Sanguinius. That will be fun. Adios. See you later.